Hey, pura vida, mi gente. How you guys doing today? Hope everything is well. May the Most High bless, protect you. Thanks for tuning in. Appreciate you taking the time to do that. All right, we're just gonna read a book here. I had here. I've been wanting to read it, go through it, and do a whole series on all the iron and they found in America. But we'll just start off with this couple chapters in this book, and we'll take it from there. All right, so thanks for tuning in. Shout out to everybody in the live chat. Appreciate you guys coming in live right now. Shout out to Joseph Levels for the instrumental in the background. Yeah, calling on our ancestors from the spirit realm is what that song is called, instrumental. Again, shout out to Joseph Levels. Yeah, pre-Columbian iron industry in North America, because everybody thinks, and they lie to us and say, we didn't have iron here in ancient America. So, that's a big lie. We got a pretty good crowd, so go ahead and get started. Wow, wow. The Rediscovery of Lost America. This is the book we're gonna get into today. The Story of the Pre-Columbian Iron Age in America by Arlington Mallory and Mary Roberts Harrison. We're going to go right into chapter 1. It's called Spruce Hill. Spruce Hill is a flat-top mountain towering above the Scioto Valley in south-central Ohio. Since the time of the earliest modern settlements nearby, this lofty and bulge intruding upon the horizon near the hamlet of Bourneville has been host to professional archaeologists and to local antiquity buffs. They have come in search of vestiges of a long vanished civilization. Through many decades, they have struggled up the precipitous, often muddy, slopes of the hill, always hoping to find among the many relics at the top answers to questions Ohioans have been asking for nearly 2 centuries. Who were the people who built the many man made earthworks standing out so boldly on our picturesque landscape or hiding in the shelter of our primeval forests? Who were the people whose novel artifacts are scattered around our countryside and so regularly exposed by farmers' plows? When did they live here? And what was their culture like? All right, that's their biggest question. All right, who are you? Who are these ancient, amazing, advanced people of the ancient Americas? They know, they just don't want to say. Among the many residents of the area in the early 1800s, speculating on the origin of the ancient fort lying in ruins on the crest of the hill was James Foster, a local newspaper editor. Foster has left a description of Spruce Hill as it was then more than 150 years ago. In 1811, all right, before leaving for service in the War of 1812, all right, what a coincidence. Shout out to just dropped, I believe, Prester John 132. We're talking about Tecumseh's Comet and the War of 1812 and all that. Hmm. And this year's comet and solar eclipse. He climbed up the hill to examine the controversial ruins and later wrote a letter describing the remains of the fort. His letter was discovered recently in Boston bookstore in a journal published in 1814, which was sent to the Ross County Historical Society as a gift. Emphasizing the antiquity of the ruins, Foster says in his letter, in part, the fort, contains about 100 acres and is enclosed by a stone wall, which, if we may judge from the quantity of stones, for it is in ruins, must have been 12 or 15 feet high and 4 or 5 feet thick. There are trees now growing on this fortification which are 4 or 5 feet in diameter, and they appear to have been preceded by a race still more gigantic, if we may judge from the long traces left by those that have rotted in their native dust. Some of the largest grew out of the foundation of the wall in places where the stone had tumbled down on the side of the hill. At the bottom of the hill on the southwest side are the ruins of a town, or rather city. The cellars are stone foundations of the houses. The cellars and stone foundations of the houses still remain. The streets are in regular squares. It was from all appearances the residence of a warlike race. Of that long destroyed race of people, we know nothing except what we learn from their works. Even their traditions have sunk with them into a common grave. But we have enough left in these vestiges of their labors and their wars to convince us that they were much more civilized than the present Indian inhabitants of any portion of our continent. 300 or 400 feet above the valley, at the summit of Spruce Hill, one can see the collapsed walls today, obviously of an ancient vintage. These fallen walls have long been among the most puzzling relics of America's past. During my brief residence in Ohio in the 1930s, I first heard about the mysteries buried at the top of the hill, a few miles to the south. Later, my research on prehistoric America included examination of many prehistoric masonry structures of unknown origin scattered throughout the northern and the northeastern areas of our country. As an experienced mason, I determined that these structures were the work of expert masons, technicians of an advanced civilization. Spruce Hill and the crumbled walls then came to my mind repeatedly. Such a heretical idea was, of course, nonsense. For more than a century, archaeologists and historians have been in agreement that only Stone Age Indians lived in America before Columbus. All right, dodge the hijack. They know we already debunked all that. Savages of the Mongolian race who came to this continent originally from Asia by way of the Bering Strait. All right, the hijack narratives that we grew up listening to, right? Which we have totally debunked in the last 7 years. Their date of arrival, some authorities believe, was probably during the Wisconsin glaciation around 20,000 BC. Again, dodge the hijack with their Bering Strait theories. Was probably during when the ice fields covering our northern lands held so much water that the sea level was reduced and the Bering Straits was a land bridge. Again, dodge the hijack, arriving probably as bands of hunters. So America was connected to Asia way before Bering Strait and ice going up and coming in and out. There was a lot of land connected to Asia. A lot of our animals went into Asia, as we have proven, like the camels and many other animals, by land. Reverse from here into the rest of the world. So this is going back since ancient times, and yeah, a lot of that stuff, that land is not connected anymore. Arriving probably as band of hunters, so the theory goes, all right, as they say, theory, this is just theories they have. They settled from the Arctic shores in the north to the southern tip, blah, blah, blah. Archaeologists and historians have been unyielding in their assumption that the people of pre-Columbian America did not smelt and cast metals. Right? Again, we have totally debunked that all the different metals we have found here. They grant that some of the earliest settlers cold hammered into usable shapes some raw metals and minerals, including copper and silver, which they thought were stones, and iron from fallen meteors, which they thought were gifts from the gods, never dreaming that they could be melted, refined, and cast into implements and ornaments. Accordingly, authorities have explained that the rare pieces of prehistoric iron and iron tools are meteoric iron, and that the more than 100,000 copper tools stored in our museums are raw copper hammered into shape by Stone Age Indians. The startling fact, however, is that these copper tools were cast by expert metallurgists of an advanced civilization and not hammered into shape by Stone Age Indians. Right? In the 1940s, I assembled, with the guidance and assistance of scientists and museums, metallurgical evidence that these tools were cast, proof that there were skilled metallurgical craftsmen in prehistoric America. If they had wanted to, these early craftsmen could have produced iron from the bog ore which was close at hand in the swamps, moors, and other lowlands of many ancient settlements. The earliest method of extracting iron from this common ore was so simple that, like firing of pottery, extraction of iron may have been one of the first crafts practiced by primitive man when he emerged from the Stone Age, so called Stone Age. Besides bog ore and charcoal for fuel, the earliest ironworker needed only a clay lined pit dug in the ground close to a hillside or on the bank of a hill to catch the prevailing wind or the updraft from the valley below. An ancient potter may have discovered the process of smelting iron when by mistake he attempted to use bog ore instead of pottery clay, and hours later found a mass of malleable iron in his kiln. Or he may have discovered that he could extract iron from bog ore by baking the ore in intense heat when he found chunks of iron in the ashes of his fires, iron which the heat had extracted from bits of bog ore on rocks or in soil in the fires. So basically, what they're trying to say is very logical to think that most what they call primitive or ancient people had the knowledge of, you know, extracting iron from stone, right? Like this is very easy thing to do as they're trying to explain, and even by mistake, as they were burning stuff and creating other things, they would have seen the iron. So why wouldn't have they produced it? So basically, how can you say that iron didn't exist here? In September 1948, I returned to Ohio to examine the masonry of the decomposed walls on Spruce Hill that researchers believe circled a fortress rising high above the mountain in prehistoric times, right? Spruce Hill, most likely a fortress. In the design and the structure of the walls, I expected to find evidence that these walls had been laid by skilled masons, technicians comparable in sophistication to the builders of the masonry structures I was then examining in the northern and northeastern sections of the country, and also to the expert metallurgists who had cast the pre Columbian copper tools piled up in our museums. Picking my way up the mountain by jeep, I came upon an astonishing phenomenon at the top. Extending for more than 2 miles around the summit lay more than 200,000 tons of quarried stone, obviously the ruins of a very old wall, a tremendous structure. Huge trees covered the line of the wall, which, in the words of E.G. Squire, were twisting their roots among the stones, which at many points had become embedded in their trunks, all right, meaning very old. The longer I pondered the piles of crumbled stones, the more probable it seemed to me As an experienced mason and builder, that the wall had been part of a stockade. The builders had piled up large quarried stones, mostly red sandstone from the side of the hill, as though for a garden wall. At regular intervals behind the wall, they had erected four long posts to hold the posts in place. They had used crossbars of saplings, anchoring them on one side in the wall and on the other side in a wall of a smaller stone's back of the post. Standing on this platform, they could pelt attackers with rocks and spears. The stone wall acted as a fire break to protect the wooden parts of the stockade from fires set to burn them down. Samuel de Champlain describes a stockade like this in use by the Iroquois. It was no surprise to me to find assurance that sophisticated builders had laid these walls. At several locations, they had provided entrances to the fort by curving the walls to form openings so ingeniously that from both sides of the openings, with a barrage of rocks and spears, they could have forced back any enemies trying to sneak through. While examining the construction of the ancient wall, I noticed tons of cinders scattered about, around and inside the piles of fallen stones. It was a peculiar substance, which had obviously been subjected to intense heat for a long time, and so I assumed that it was refuse of very extensive operations, or refuge involving fire. I was puzzled, for although it resembled most slag from iron smelting, it was too dark and too heavy to be slag. Soon I was asking myself if this strange cinder could be refuse of prehistoric iron smelting. And then I realized that I was looking at an ancient slag for the first time in my life. Recalling my metallurgical studies, I identified the cinder as an ancient slag by its distinguishable features, color, and weight. Unlike modern slag, lighter in color and in weight, ancient slag retained much of the iron in the ore, which gave it color and weight. The earliest crude earth pit furnaces were wasteful smelters, for they did not extract all of the iron from the ore. Under normal conditions, these primitive furnaces operated below the melting point of iron. Consequently, the iron did not melt in them as it does in modern high temperature blast furnaces. Instead, most of the non metallic elements in the iron ore melted, and the iron was left mixed with impurities as a solid and an accumulated mass. The general belief that in the extraction of iron from iron ore, it is necessary to melt the iron is a misconception based on the modern process of melting the iron in high temperature furnaces that operate at a heat above the melting point of iron. The remaining slag is almost devoid of iron, having usually as little as 1% or less. All right, you guys hear that? The quality of iron that we kind of get today. Whereas ancient slag had an iron content often of 50% or more. After a moment's review of what I had read about the ancient process of producing iron, there was no doubt in my mind. The cinder was the refuse of prehistoric iron smelting. As I contemplated with wonder the presence of ancient slag in the ruins of an ancient stone wall, I realized that somewhere nearby there would be an ancient smelter for heating bog or a primitive earth pit. In fact, many primitive earth pits, considering the tons of slag lying around, if they had not been obliterated by man or the natural elements through the ages, it should be possible to find them, or at least their remains. Eagerness to find the old furnace or furnaces grew as I reasoned that there would be clues to determining who these prehistoric ironworkers were and the kind of furnaces we would find. All right. So they have actually found a lot of these furnaces, stone furnaces near ancient lakes and mounds and stuff. And they try to give them, Civil War era dates. They try to say, oh, these were built in the Civil War, but there's no proof of that. Just like a lot of the buildings, they say, oh, this was built in 1800s, but they don't have no proof of that. with oxen carts and, no power tools and these majestic buildings. Shout out to all the mud flood reset old world researchers out there. Shout out to Drop again for the Professor John Drop he was mentioned in that video. All right, so again, yeah, he's this guy's excited. He's like, that is definitely ancient iron ore. I need to find these furnaces. We would be able to track down their identity with the help of the records of the step by step advancement in the development of the craft of iron extraction through centuries. The message of the slag was that it was produced in the earliest herf pits. My interest now was to find to what stage of development the primitive smelters belonged. The very crude, very old type, which I had classified as Celtic, or a later, improved type distinguished by the addition of a flue to increase the draft and to carry the slag and the mass of separated iron down to a receptacle. This latter type of herf pit I had named Nordic. The possibility that the herf pits, which we were certain to find would be a more advanced type, seemed unlikely, for the slag was too rich in iron. With the assistance of several aided and a bulldozer, I set about to try to find some herf pits or their remains, curious about the stage of development to which they would belong. After several hours of digging in promising areas, with the slag as a guide to its location, we finally uncovered a herf pit on a ledge below the stone wall. Only since recent excavations by Swedish and German scientists have the exact appearance and the method of operation of such a furnace been known to the modern world. This herf pit is a large, about 12 feet long and 8 feet wide. The bottom and the sides are covered by a layer of clay a foot thick. But this furnace is not the earliest type, which I call Celtic. It belongs to a later stage of development because it has an opening at the bottom about a foot square to a stone covered flue, the same size, and 8 feet long. At the end of this flue is a small clay receptacle whose purpose is to bring in air and to carry out the porous mass of iron to the receptacle where the bloom, the accumulated iron, is formed. This flue identifies the furnace as the Nordic type, as does the rough sandstone wall, 2 feet high, surrounding it. In 1919, George Shoemaker, a resident of Bourneville, came upon this furnace on a visit to Spruce Hill in search of gold. He found the pit filled with cinder, rotten wood, bits of charcoal, and a glazed pieces of berea, sandstone, and clinker. Certain that there was some gold in the hodgepodge, he cleaned out the pit. What he discovered was not gold, but an oval bowl with bottom and sides lined with potter's clay. Shoemaker had worked in a pottery, and so he recognized the linen as clay from a pit or vein on the bank of Paint Creek directly below. We found the pit from which the bog ore had apparently been dug about 60 feet from the furnace. In 1919, Shoemaker had cleaned out this pit and found that it was about 16 feet deep. At the moment, we uncovered the oval pit with the clay linen or lining. Elation sent my thoughts soaring into the world of Heinrich Schleitmann and his Troy and the realm of forbidden fancy. Here, on the crest of Spruce Hill, in the center of our great continent, lie the remains of a prehistoric Iron Age civilization. Okay, talking about Spruce Hill, Ohio. Is this really a hill? Most likely, it's all stone or man-made structure underneath here. So they're saying Nordic, right? They're trying to say, eventually, and he goes on to say, most likely this is the Vikings, right? Always, they will never give credit to ancient Americans for coming, for creating these things, building these things. They always try to say if somebody else came here and built it. Now, is there a connection with the so-called Vikings and ancient Americans? Yes. But to give so-called Vikings all the credit for this, you might be seeing it in reverse. And most likely that is the truth. that you are seeing in reverse. There's here a section of prehistoric Celtic type furnace found at N. Tralibo, Sweden. Above, a section of prehistoric Celtic type furnace found on the Spruce Hill in Ross County, Ohio. All right, so they're telling you the comparison. We, my, we, my associates and I, have discovered or stumbled upon proof that America was the home of an advanced civilization centuries ago, right? Again, more and more correlation, more drop. We gotta just, stop with the idea that there were savages here, this was a new world, all that, that's you gotta throw all that away. We've shown so much. This is just more icing on the cake. As he says, America was home of an advanced civilization centuries ago. Uncovering this Nordic type earth pit was only the beginning of a successful search for more remains of the ancient Iron Age civilization on this continent. Encouraged by metallurgical tests showing that the iron content of the slag in the furnace was around 30%, and that approximately only 40% of the iron in the ore had been recovered in this Nordic type furnace. We returned to Spruce Hill many times. Each time we uncovered more furnaces, including several of the Celtic type, more primitive. All right, they just kept finding more and more furnaces. Metallurgical tests showed that the slag in these furnaces had twice the content of the slag in the Nordic furnace, showing that the Celtic furnaces on Spruce Hill were half as efficient as the Nordic furnace we had found there. In the fall of 1951, we uncovered a Celtic furnace and a mound of quarry stones on Spruce Hill. Again, they're naming this Nordic and Celtic. Just that's just how way they describe it. That's how they could explain it, because that's what they had reference from. But America's a true old world. A member of our group cut into the mound of stones and uncovered a reddish area that turned out to be the top of a furnace. Digging down farther, we uncovered a earth pit almost 9 feet in diameter. It had a linen of red clay, 4 inches deep. It did not have the additional equipment that the Nordic furnace had, a flue and receptacle. So, by my classification, it was a Celtic furnace, a more primitive type. A more primitive type, all right? Looking at the pictures here, it says rune stone at entrance to Viking grave on Spruce Hill. So they're even finding inscriptions here, guys. Runic, rune, right? They're finding inscriptions, and that's why they're probably giving it, the Viking name, Nordic name. But again, they found all this all over the Americas. America's a true old world. It says here Viking grave on Spruce Hill. Everything Viking, everything Celtic, nothing American. Even though they're finding it in ancient America, right? Here in Ohio. The start of it all, right? What is the motto of Ohio? Start of it all. To extract iron in a very primitive furnace such as this one, the iron worker had to work much harder than the iron worker with a Nordic furnace. In the Celtic furnace, the accumulated iron, the bloom, remained at the bottom of the pit. Before lifting it out, the worker had to quench the fire with water and remove the unconsumed fuel to get the bloom into a suitable condition to be forged. It was often necessary for him to reheat it several times, and each time he had to make a new fire and then quench it after the reheating. This very crude type of earth pit was used by Celtic people in Europe and Ireland before the Christian era, and later, and undoubtedly by other early people, all right? He's saying it's just like that. It became obsolete, however, in the developed areas of the Western Hemisphere and in other areas also during the 14th century. So this was an ancient way of extracting the iron ore, all right, and creating iron, right, metallurgy, creating these weapons, artifacts, and all that. Later, I cut into the mound of quarry stones and uncovered 4 more earth pit furnaces. Two underneath the stone walls. One of them is an oval basin with walls of Berea grit, the parent rock of Bagor. Several large stones, which had been obviously subjected to intense heat, showed that the wall had been about 16 feet high at this point. While excavating around the wall with a bulldozer, we discovered that the wood ties of the stockade post had rotted in the water. Sleeping through the wall had so undermined the stone facing that it had collapsed. When we reached the ground under the wall, we cut into what appeared to be the charred butt ends of stockade posts, which had been either cut down or burned down. Near the Nordic furnace, there is a circular stone covered mound on a high promontory. Set deep in the top of this mound is a stone engraved in runes. All right? Inscriptions, letters of the Norse alphabet. Come on, man. This is from America here. They're finding this, guys, in Ohio. The stone marks the entrance to a grave like those found in many locations in Scandinavia, just like the ones they found over there in Europe. Stone vaulted burial chambers known as ancient Scandinavian passage graves. All right, they're finding this in Ohio. The ruins of nine more of these stone lined graves lie on another promontory near the furnace. At one time, there were thousands of such stone lined graves in the Middle West, identical with those in ancient Northern Europe. Few of them have survived. Archaeologists have made little effort to preserve the great stone monuments of the ancient civilization, which they have not been able to explain, all right? It don't fit the historical narratives, the textbooks, what they teach us in school, so they just don't mention it. They just let it go into more ruin. That was the end of chapter one. We're gonna go right into chapter two. I hope you guys are enjoying the read so far. Thanks for tuning in. All right. And again, we are reading The Rediscovery of Lost America by Arlington Humphrey Mallory from 1979. Chapter 2, The Pre-colombian Iron Industry in Ohio. Ohio newsmen who followed our excavations on Spruce Hill performed their job with gusto. To them we owe the cooperation of their readers, who led us to our next discoveries. Often weighed down by cameras, heavy windbreakers, and boots, they trudged along beside us through mud, over rock piles and refuse heaps, always in high spirits. They clung to our diggers, awaiting the unearthing of the next relic of the vanished civilization, to pick up all they could about methods of ancient iron smelting, the structure of the crude hearth pits, the peculiar slag produced in these primitive smelters, and the probable people whose relics we were finding. They lingered around the sites after the digging was over, unmindful of passing mealtimes, pelting rain, and other discomforts. Occasionally, they took up shovels and picks and joined the digging, and later became members of our group, contributing both labor and ideas. News accounts of our findings and of the Mallory claims sometimes carried the disparaging remarks of some so called authorities, but on the whole were objective and accurate reports, even of the most technical factors of ancient iron smelting, presented with an air of excitement and wonder, illustrated by many photographs of sites and digging crews and hand drawn diagrams of the ancient furnaces. These new stories kindled the interest of many readers in the glazed cinders and sandstones scattered about their land. From farmers in the Deer Creek Valley, about 10 miles from Spruce Hill, came lumps of cinder to be examined by me. It was obvious at first glance that all of the cinder sent to me was identical to the ancient slag on Spruce Hill. So more evidence of more locations where they were, extracting the iron. All right. This image right here, it says Eliza Shoemaker, Bourneville, Ohio, looks on as Mallory points to the upper rim of fortification from Bastion at Blackamore Knob, Ross County, Ohio, January 10th, 1953. So I closed down the excavation work on the hill and went to the Deer Creek Valley, certain that we would find some ancient earth pits there. Luckily, our discoveries in the valley during the following 2 years far exceeded my expectations. Within several days of excavating on sites there, we unearthed 14 furnaces representing the development of the iron extraction industry over a period of several centuries. All right, guys, see that so many furnaces they're finding. Most of these furnaces were buried at the bottom of prehistoric mounds, at the bottom of mounds that had not been disturbed since the earliest modern settlements, except for surface plowing, all right? So these ain't from the Vikings, basically, is what he's telling you. These haven't been disturbed. Some of the furnaces covered three-fourths of the base of a mound. Modern settlers could not have built them. They were with could not have built them there without tearing down the mounds that covered them, okay? They could not have been intrusive in any other way. And so the antiquity of the furnaces is established by their position in the mounds, all right? This is from the ancient so called mound builders. These Deer Creek Valley furnaces are all the old world type. Listen again, so are all the old world type of ancient earth pits, just like the old world. Again, America is the old world. In the ways in which they differ among themselves and structural details they present as a whole, a record of the advancing steps in the development of the iron extraction craft over countless years, all right? This is the development, the origin. As the first site for excavation in the valley, I chose a mound on the farm of George Arlish, about 8 miles north of Bourneville. It is one of the well known prehistoric man made earthworks of unknown origin. My attention had been drawn to this particular mound by Professor Edward Keeler of Ohio State University and an archaeologist with the Ohio State Archaeological Museum, who had picked up glazed slag and sandstone plowed out of the mound. When we first met, Arlish told me that his plow was turning up quantities of cinder and sandstone when he cultivated the top of the mound and increased in amount as time passed. The mound was then in December 1948 about 50 feet in diameter and only 6 feet high. The farmer and his lifelong neighbors said that in 1910 it was 16 feet high and covered with locust trees, and that during the intervening half century, the trees and the upper 10 feet of the mound had been removed by cultivation. They explained how they had plowed out many tons of refuse, cinders, charcoal, bog ore, and stones in layers. All right, you guys hear that? Their description of this waste assured me that an ancient earth pit was buried in this mound, and that the plow of farmers Arlish had was getting so close to it that we would be able to reach it in a few hours of digging, according to descriptions of the prehistoric iron smelting industry. The prehistoric mounds in Europe, covering it, and ancient furnaces had been built of the same waste. Just like the mounds in Europe, they're finding furnaces, guys. Come on now, let's be logical. That is, by heaping over the furnaces and the graves of the iron masters the accumulated ashes, iron slag, surplus iron, and refuse, and then covering the pile of waste with a blanket of loam. To uncover the furnace that I felt certain was now close to the ground surface of the mound, I dug a trench through the slag marked mound with the assistance of several residents of nearby towns. Near the center of the mound, we found the first of the 14 Deer Creek Valley furnaces. This one is oval pit, almost 8 feet long and 5 feet wide. The vertical walls are 6 inches of soft red burnt iron ore, and the inner facing is glazed. All right. The next day, we cleaned out the furnace chamber and found that it was so complex in structure that only highly skilled metallurgists could have designed it. To reach the furnace floor, we shoveled out more than 4 feet of materials and layers. On top was a 2 foot layer of loam with pieces of glazed cinder and sandstone. Then a foot of partially burned bog ore, some black ashes, a 6 inch layer of hard burned bog ore, and finally, resting on the floor, a bed of white ashes and charcoal. The floor below was a layer of hard burned bog ore over an inch thick. When we broke up this hard, smooth floor, I saw that this furnace was more technically advanced in structural detail than the furnaces on Spruce Hill. It is probably a type that was in general use as late as 200 years before the blast furnace came into wide use around the middle of the 14th century, okay? All right, I told you, origin. You can see the development. Remember the model of Ohio, the start of it all. The striking structural difference of this furnace was that underneath the floor was a bed of loosely laid cobblestone, about 18 inches deep, and buried in this cobblestone base was a large flue. These unusual features of the furnace, an underground flue passing through a cobblestone base under the furnace floor, point to the Greenland Norse as the designers. All right, now they want to say it has to be people from Greenland that came and built it. Maybe even the builders of this furnace. All right, dodge the hijack. He's just conjecturing because he doesn't think people in America could do this. Danish archaeologists found a furnace with a flue and a cobblestone base in the ruins of the settlement of Autsmanadal, Greenland. The Autsmanadal settlement was abandoned by the Norse about 1350. All right, so what if you're seeing it in reverse and you're seeing from here to Greenland to Europe instead of the other way around? Our digging in Deer Creek Valley was interrupted several times by excitement over discoveries of other relics of the prehistoric iron industry. As our picks and shovels tore into the waste laden mounds, they unearthed iron bars, iron shovels, and iron axe with a mineralized wooden handle, okay? What do you mean they didn't find iron tools here? The first of these relics was found by Elsa Shoemaker, a local school teacher in the mound of the Arlish farm. It was a bar of cast iron, 3 feet long and 62 pounds in weight. Seeing the bar stuck in the flue of the furnace, Shoemaker thought it was a stone and asked his son Herbert to dig it out. Herbert, seeing that it was a bar of iron, cleared away the surrounding debris, and his brother Paul photographed the bar as it lay in the flue of the furnace in which it had been made. This billet of iron is the first iron object produced in prehistoric America to be found in the furnace in which it was produced. Okay, this is what they're saying. They found it just like this. Figure 2-2, the iron bar in the furnace in the Arlish Mound where it was found. All right, iron. It was submitted to the National Bureau of Standards for examination. Dr. George Ellinger, who analyzed the bar there, reported that the iron workers who made it apparently did not know how to eliminate phosphorus in the production of iron. At the time of the earliest settlements in modern times, in the area where the bar was found, iron was produced there in abundance in modern blast furnaces. Like other modern iron, it did not have a high phosphorus content. All right, so it wasn't a modern creation. Is what they're letting you know. Ancient furnaces did not produce cast iron, so how can the presence of this bar of cast iron in the flue of an ancient furnace be explained? It can be assumed that cast iron was produced in prehistoric furnaces in small amounts on those rare occasions when the temperature in the furnace was abnormally increased by an accidentally increased blast or unusually high wind at a time when there was an excess of charcoal in the chamber. In the case of this bar of cast iron, the furnace temperature had probably risen so high that it had completely melted the iron in the ore. The molten metal had filled the flue and then cooled off when the flue became clogged. Finding his furnace blocked by the long bar of iron, the ironworker had evidently broken into the front of the furnace, quenched the fire with water, and tried to pry out the bar. In his unsuccessful effort, he broke it off 37 inches from the end, leaving the flue clogged with the remaining 3 feet of the bar. Instead of repairing the furnace, he evidently abandoned it with the bar still in the flue. Micrographs of the bar showed that the structure of the iron had been altered by exposure to intense heat for months after the bar had formed. Since the floor of the furnace was still intact, it seemed probable that there was another flue that had admitted air to the furnace after the first flue had been clogged. Ancient German furnaces of this type, Nordic, called Schlemmstovens, sometimes were equipped with more than one flue. The following spring, we returned to the site in search of a second flue. In the loose plowed up loam at the site, we noticed glazed dark green and purple stones, and about 2 feet from the open surface, a ring of red burnt bog. Excavating at this point, we uncovered a second furnace, smaller than the first and a later type, standing on a loosely laid cobblestone base. It was equipped with cobblestone back wall, which would permit the entrance of air, and also a flue constructed of cobblestones and lined with lime to draw off the iron and slag. The mound had been built over the two furnaces sometime after the second one was shut down. A complete record of our excavations at the Arlish Mound was filed at the Smithsonian Institution Bureau of American Ethnology. All right, now you guys know why we never learned of this, because you guys know what the Smithsonian Institute does, right? They just hide everything, they gatekeep, and they alter the narratives. The report includes the known history of the mound and its previous owners, affidavits, photographs, and drawings that describe in full the position of the furnaces in the mound, their structure and content, and complete metallurgical analysis of the bar. They gave them all the evidence, all the proof, all the investigation, all the research. Finding cast iron in his furnace meant trouble for the ancient iron worker, for it was useless to him and often a nuisance, especially if it was lodged in such a position that it blocked furnace operation. He no doubt found that he could not hammer it into usable shape because it was too brittle and could not remelt it because the crude smelter operated below the temperature required for melting iron. And so annoyed, he would probably discard this abnormal product of his labors. In these Arlish Mound furnaces, I found the first evidence of the use of lime in the craft of iron extraction. The practice of using limestone as a flux may have begun in the Deer Creek Valley, apparently in order to distribute the draft evenly throughout the furnace. Ancient iron workers frequently spread a layer of small broken stones over the iron ore. Heat formed white and colored glazes on the stones, and so when glazed stones are found in and around a mound, it is likely that there is or has been an ancient hearth pit inside the mound. The Deer Creek Valley iron masters must have used limestone pebbles from Deer Creek to produce a slow, even draft. When they found that the limestone pebbles increased the efficiency of their iron extraction operations, they may have started to use limestone regularly in place of other stones. All right, so we're going to look at this diagram right here. It says top of mound in 1900. So this is when they went and started digging in the 70s, I believe, or 60s. It was already, it had already been kind of destroyed. People were using it to cultivate and all that. So they started digging from this second line, and that's when they started finding the furnaces and everything and the iron artifacts. All right, and the Arlich Mound. This is everything they sent. Look, this is from 1949. All right, so this is everything they sent the Smithsonian, and they didn't do anything. Drawing of the prehistoric iron smelting furnaces in the Arlich Mound. The furnaces were built 50 yards south of Low Hill on the original ground surface of a level 200-acre field. Earth embankments around the furnace had a dual function. They braced the furnace walls and provided space for the platforms from which fuel and ore were fed into the furnaces. An inclined runaway was used for carrying material to the upper platforms, while others at the furnace floor level were used for removing slag and billets of iron. The drawing above show the relatively proportions of the furnaces. All right, so what they're saying, while we were digging out the furnace in the Arledge Mound, Fred Keeler, the Ross County agricultural agent, joined us, bringing encouraging news. He said that he had seen the ruins of a structure that might be an ancient iron furnace on the bank of Deer Creek, about 100 yards away. Following Keeler to the creek, we saw there in the side of the bank the end of a furnace, lying in a heap in the gravel of the creek bed, 12 feet or more below the top of the bank were the ruins of the remainder of the demolished furnace, where they had fallen. This furnace was built many centuries ago, several feet below the ground surface of a level field. This, the creek was then a distance away, flowing in its ancient bed. During the ages, it washed away the land and moved near the buried turf pit. By 1900, it was within 150 yards, and there was a road between the creek and the Herf pit. By 1948, the creek had wiped out the road, reached the furnace, and undermined it. All that was left of the ancient structure was an end of the furnace set precariously in the side of the bank of the creek. As we poked around in the debris of the furnace remains, our picks hit a large solid object. Pushing aside the loam and other fill covering it, we laid bare a very old shovel. Believing that it might have been used by early settlers to dig in the furnace debris, we hid the shovel in the field above, hoping that nobody would use it to dig further in the furnace and destroy what was left of it. We were overlooking two facts. The furnace had been exposed only a year or so, and the shovel was too old to have been used by early settlers. Listen to this. The enigma of the origin of this shovel would become one of the most tantalizing challenges to confront me in my work on the ancient iron industry. So they most likely found an ancient shovel used by the ancient mound builders. When this furnace collapsed, it contained at least 3 tons of iron ore. The ancient iron workers abandoned it. They filled the chamber with stones, gravel, bits of lime, and other refuse. Then, after roofing the top with a layer of plaster, they covered it with loam. While watching us uncover the furnace in the Arledge Mound, Charles Haskins, a nearby farmer, told us that his plow turned up glazed slag and stones and even some iron when he cultivated a low mound on his land. So Paul Shoemaker and I went to the neighboring Haskins farm to examine the slag and the iron. While escorting us to the low ridge overlooking Deer Creek, Haskins explained that the mound had been reduced 5 feet in height by surface plowing during the 50 years since his father had bought the land. They just be destroying the mounds. They got land in these ancient sites, containing mounds. Who was giving them all this land, right? It and they just, destroying them. They didn't care. Deciding at first glance that the slag here was identical to the slag scattered about the sites on Spruce Hill and the Arlish Mound, were where we had unearthed furnaces. Young Shoemaker and I dug into the ridge. A few inches below the surface, no, not more than 10 inches, we struck the walls of a furnace. Haskins' plows would have cut into this furnace the next year. Piled nearby was a heap of refuse, glazed and unglazed slag, pieces of burnt clay, ashes, lime, and charcoal, which Haskins said he had carted away from the mountain many wagon loads during several decades. And yet nobody had even suspected that inside this mound there was an iron extraction furnace. All right, look what they're finding in the mounds, guys, in Ohio. So many of them, right, guys? They were producing iron in abundance. They were, as we were to learn, when we unearthed 3 more the next year, 4 furnaces in this mound. After Paul and I removed the topsoil and uncovered the top of the furnace wall, we found that the chamber was filled with dark loam to within about 10 inches from the bottom. Down to this point, the walls were red, and there was no evidence that there had been any lime in this furnace. Below the loam was a 10-inch layer of what we thought was lime, which covered completely the furnace floor and filled a flue hole in the wall. Not until 1962, over 10 years later, that we know what we thought was lime was white clay. In that year, tests by the U.S. Bureau of Standards proved that the long time assumed to be lime was clay. We removed the layer of clay and found under it a hard concrete floor in which were embedded some boards obviously split from a tree trunk. Paul and I thought the boards were at the top of a coffin, and so we decided to suspend the work until the next day so that we could have witnesses to the opening of the coffin. However, when we looked when we took the boards up the next day, we found that they were laid on the concrete bottom, not on a coffin. Paul returned to college, and so several local residents, including Haskins, continued the excavation he and I had started. Under my supervision, they dug a trench about 6 feet wide to explore the area just outside the flue hole. They uncovered there a concrete working platform extending 4 feet beyond the furnace wall. At the end of the platform, in a pile of trash, William Miller, who was helping in the work on this furnace, found another bar of iron, much like the bar that Elsa Shoemaker had uncovered in the Arlish Mound. This second bar was smaller, almost 3 feet long, and 55 pounds in weight. All right, again, iron, guys, they found it. It was cast iron like the first bar, but it was softer iron. The iron worker had apparently abandoned it because of its uselessness to him, for it was found in the trash. After cleaning up the platform, Miller started to dig the clay out of the flue end. He found at the outer end of an old iron shovel, completely encased in the white clay. It looked much like the shovel we had found in the remains of the furnace on the bank of Deer Creek, which we had assumed was a very old but modern shovel. This shovel was found at the bottom of the mound under the wall of a prehistoric iron furnace, and so it could not be a modern shovel. Its location under a prehistoric mound was proof of its prehistoric origin. I was not present when Miller found the shovel, as he was hanging it to me on my return. We remarked simultaneously that it had to be an ancient shovel, and the shovel found earlier, which was almost identical to this one, also had to be an ancient shovel. This furnace was in perfect condition. It is an improved form of the second furnace found in the Arlish Mound. It is over 8 feet long and 6 feet wide. The floor slopes from the back toward an air and draw off flue. With the flue wide open, slag could be drawn out while ore and fuel were being inserted at the top. It was planned for continuous operation like furnaces described by Ludwig Beck, an authority on ancient German furnaces. On June 1st, 1949, I sent both old iron shovels to the Battelle Memorial Institute for metallurgical examination. Scientists there made elaborate spectroscopic, chemical, and metallurgical analysis of the shovels. They reported that their analysis showed that the shovels were not made by modern processes or of modern iron. All right, guys, they found ancient mound builder shovels, right? Because there are no articles of comparable antiquity. Okay, so sorry, I skipped the part. Although they may have been made in colonial times or earlier, it would be impossible to assign a date to them, they explained, because there are no articles of comparable antiquity of known date available for comparison. There's nothing like it in the world, guys. Nothing like this. May be the oldest shovels ever found in the world, right here in Ohio. Again, America, the true old world. Not far from the oldest land, right? That came up, the oldest forest, the oldest trees. We ain't too far, remember? This scientific analysis of the old shovels led to a fascinating revelation concerning the ingenuity of ancient iron workers, at least some of them. They used an ingenious method for fabricating from their soft iron hard blades for such special objects as axes, shovels, and swords. All right, we had swords, axes, shovels made of iron. Just picture the true old world here. All that they're showing you that happening over there on the other side, they show you in movies. Picture all that happening here. We had all that. The famous Damascus sword blades, for example, a technique that became a lost art for centuries. After the spread of the use of the modern furnace and the production of steel, revived in recent times in jet plane construction, this process is now known as cladding. Cladding is the welding at less than normal temperature of two thin sheets of steel or carburized iron to produce iron of utmost strength. Norse iron was so soft that Norse warriors were forced to step out of the battle line to straighten out their swords by stepping on them. How you see that, guys? You hear that? All right, we got a bottle again. Let's see. Don't hate. Don't hate. Give us the drop. Give us the drop. Hold on. That's the thing about some of these books. They won't let you like download or anything. You gotta just kind of borrow them, and sometimes they're unborrowable. A lot of the good books now, they're making them unborrowable. All right. So they're saying that some of these swords were so soft. Middle of the battle, they had to strain them out, right? Like stepping on them and stuff. So they were stepping on them with their heels after striking only 3 or 4 blows. To prepare such soft iron for cladding, ancient craftsmen first hardened it by heating it in crucibles with charcoal at very high heat for days until the thin sheets were transformed into steel by carbon absorbed from the coal, called carburization. This process is both costly and time consuming, and so it was used very selectively, only for the manufacture of special objects. Right, going back to these images, there's here figure 2-4, prehistoric iron shovels. All right, the first shovels in the world found in Ohio. Two ancient shovels, guys, they found made out of iron. Made out of iron. Arlington Mallory points to a collection of iron bars and implements found in remains of prehistoric furnaces in Ohio. Okay, iron artifacts. When the Battelle scientists explained the cladding process to me, and at the same time said that the blades of both shovels were two sheets of carburized iron cladded, I asked them if they thought the shovels were ancient. If they were of ancient origin, they replied, they would have to have been preserved for centuries in an environment protective to iron, and chemical analysis showed that they were found in an environment quite protective to iron. A mineral coating formed on the surface of the blades as a result of the soil in which they lay, according to Dr. J.C. DeHaven of Battelle, could have preserved the iron for a very long time. The possibility remained, however, that the shovels were made in our colonial settlements. But it seemed unlikely to me that colonial ironworkers would have used the slow and costly carburizing process to get iron hard enough for tools, nails, and other objects, since modern ironworking methods were, in general, used in their time, and they could produce steel without such an expenditure of time and money, all right? So it makes no sense. It wasn't colonial people. Use your logical mind, right? So they're letting you know why. You know, and anybody who knows about this knows what he's talking about. So I decided to have some samples of colonial iron tested to determine if any of them had been cladded. For this purpose, I borrowed some iron nails, coal blades, and other tools found in the abandoned Jamestown, Virginia settlement of the early 1600s for testing at Battelle Memorial Institute. Metallurgists there found no sign of cladding of any of these colonial objects, which were loaned for testing by the National Park Service. Okay, it's not colonial. It's not like the metal or the artifacts they were producing, the metallurgy that was being produced in the 1600s, 1700s. All right, it's not the same. This is real ancient metallurgy, real ancient iron, real ancient shovels. from the mound builders, guys. They told us we didn't have iron or metal nine like that. Yeah, right. Most likely hid it all or put it in the museums over there, just like the mummies they found here, and said, "Oh, that this was found in Greece. This was found in Rome. What Rome? What Rome?" The quantity of refuse typical of refuse from iron extraction present in and around the Low Haskins Mound suggested that the mound had been the site of very extensive prehistoric iron production. All right, very extensive. Prehistoric. So I returned to the site in the summer of 1950, certain that there were more furnaces in the mound. Digging at the other end of the mound, my associates and I unearthed two more iron bars and an axe with a mineralized wooden handle. Going down deeper, we uncovered three more furnaces. The four furnaces in this mound represent four stages in the development of the ancient iron industry, probably covering a period of 1,000 years. 1,000 years. Probably it could be even more. They show the progressive evolution characteristic of a long continued civilization that was interrupted before its final end by a different but related culture. Tests of a slag found on the sites of the furnaces in both the Arledge and the Haskins mounds show that these furnaces extracted about 80% of the iron in the ore. This is an exceptionally high yield for ancient hearth pit furnaces and is an indication that they operated at a higher temperature than the usual operating temperature of ancient furnaces. Basically, what they're telling you is that they're realizing that these ancient furnaces they find in America appears to have produced way more iron than the ones in ancient Europe. Okay, several months later, in December 1950, a hunter looking for rabbits a mile or so south of Austin, Ohio, came upon a strange rock formation on the bank of a stream. Having read news accounts of the discovery of the prehistoric iron furnaces on Spruce Hill and in the Deer Creek Valley, he came to Bourneville to tell us what he had seen, suggesting that it looked like what's left of one of those ancient furnaces. So, accompanied by four members of the staff of the Battelle Memorial Institute and an archaeologist of the Ross County Historical Society, I followed him to the location of his discovery. There on the Walker Overley farm, a stream had cut into its bank, leaving exposed the remains of a furnace on the side of the bank. What we saw was a cross section or profile of the original structure, and it was this that had intrigued the hunter. During 2 days of digging nearby, we uncovered two more hearth pit furnaces, excavating about 18 inches below ground level. Under a large tree stump, we hit the top of a stone wall. Going down 4 feet farther, we discovered that it was the wall of an ancient furnace, circular in shape and 4 feet high. The pit was filled with earth, and rooted in the fill was the trunk of a tree. 65 rings on tree indicated its age as 65 years. All three hearth pits had been damaged by the waters of the creek. It was possible, however, to determine that two of them had flat bottoms. One of the one of cobblestone plastered with clay, and the other of hard concrete. We all agreed that these two furnaces were Nordic type furnaces, like the first furnace unearthed in the Haskins Mound. All of the prehistoric furnaces unearthed in Ohio described so far are like those unearthed in Europe. All right, just like the ones in Europe, guys. In the summer of 1950, however, we found a different type of ancient smelter buried in a prehistoric mound on the farm of William H. Allen at the foot of Brays Hill near Frankfort, Ohio. This exceptional furnace resembles a beehive in structure. Hold on, guys. In structural outline, furnaces like it were common in Africa, Asia, and probably in South America. Finding this furnace introduced a tremendously important new dimension to what we were learning about the prehistoric world, for it provided a link between the prehistoric iron industry on this continent and the prehistoric iron industry in Egypt, India, and Peru, all right? Meaning with the ancient cultures of the world. All right, we're gonna go back, check out some of these images. And it says here, top of the mountain, 1910. So I guess this is the one they went to after in the guy's farm. And so this is what they're finding, guys. Look at all this furnaces down here. Ancient furnaces, wow. This is the plan they drew. This is all the stuff they sent the Smithsonian, and they still didn't, acknowledge it or teach us this stuff. Drawings of 4 prehistoric iron smelting furnaces in the Haskins Mound. The east furnace of the Haskins Mound group is an Ankyllin furnace similar to those described by Emil Swedenborg in 1734. All right, so you guys can read the rest. Here's some images. It says here Donald Macbeth standing in the trench between the Ankyllin and the roasting furnaces. All right, again, this is found inside mounds, guys. This is ancient. It says here Celtic furnace linen of rubble masonry laid in clay mortar, right? So again, they're calling it Celtic, but this is in Ohio. Celtic and Ankyllin furnaces. Celtic furnace shown flue in the bottom. An axe was found in this furnace. Okay. So again, they're digging through these mounds, finding all these furnaces. Who's stealing history? Milkshake gas. Hey, moderators. We're not stealing history. What do you mean, man? We're just reading here, man. We're reading archaeological finds of proven iron metallurgy being, happening in ancient America. I'm not sure what you mean about stealing history. And who's we? We. You just speak in French. We. Pepe le Pew. That's what your we smells like. Pepe le Pew. That is. Here you go. The discovery of this furnace in the Allen Mound is important too, because it tells us that the pre-Columbian Americans were skilled in the use of powder metallurgy. We had assumed that the process of powder metallurgy in America was a modern industrial process. All right, so they were doing this in pre-Columbian America. The Allen furnace is a replica of furnaces used in India for the extraction of iron by the process of powder metallurgy, just like the ones in Hindustan, who were the ancient Nagas. What is powder metallurgy? The following comments, which appeared on page 26 of the April 1954 issue of the trade journal Steelways, describe this metallurgical technique. Powder metallurgy has been around for 5,000 years. Okay, listen. This is what they're finding in Ohio. The Egyptians used it as early as 3000 BC. They had no furnace that could melt iron, so they powdered their iron ore, heated it as hot as they could, and then hammered and shaped it. The particles, as hot as they could, the particles of iron bonded together, just as they do in today's sintering furnaces. The Incas used it too, but except for a few instances, powder metallurgy became dormant and almost forgotten until comparatively recent times. In 1950, the Allen Mound was 60 feet in diameter and 7 feet tall. The furnace that we unearthed rested on the original ground surface at the center of the mound. It was built of clay. At the furnace top was a 7-inch flue, and in the base was 12-inch opening. In the operation of their furnaces, similar to this Allen Mound furnace, the Agadia of India poured several bushels of charcoal into the furnace through the top opening, and then a charge of powdered ore mixed with more charcoal. Paul Shoemaker cleaned out the furnace, digging out ashes and charcoal. Donald Macbeth, archaeologist of the Ross County Museum, worked on the platform, brushing aside the charcoal. Very close to the furnace, he came upon a pile of skeletons. Later, while clearing the area surrounding the furnace, we found three more piles of skeletons in layers 3 to 5 feet deep. They averaged 6 feet in length, but were too decomposed to remove. All right, so before we continue, go back to some of the images here. All right, some more images of them, digging out the iron furnaces and these mounds. In this case, the Allen Mound in Frankfort, Ohio. Okay, another image here. I guess this is one from India, so they can just compare. You guys can compare what they're talking about. All right. So there's a modern one in India. This is what they're finding in the ancient mounds, right? So now they're finding skeletons too, right? These skeletons may have been the remains of the victims of a plague epidemic, probably iron workers, they don't know, wiped out in such large numbers that it was necessary to bury them all together without the customary grave goods. All right. And that's the end of chapter 2. So you guys saw all that evidence of iron being produced, real high quality iron, just like all the ancient cultures of the world were producing iron. And their evidence shows that these furnaces actually produce way more. It seems they produce more iron than the ones they're finding in the other parts of the world. All right, in Ohio. Now we're going to move into chapter 3. All right, chapter 3. That was the Ohio, Spruce Hill, and then many other parts of Ohio. Again, we're in the book, The Rediscovery of Lost America by Arlington Humphrey Mallory from 1979. And again, we continue. We're going to go into chapter 3, the Pre-colombian Iron Industry in Virginia. All right, in Virginia. Neither the magnitude nor the capability of the prehistoric iron industry in America will ever be known, even approximately. When I climbed Spruce Hill to examine the ruins of the ancient stone wall there, I came upon piles of ancient iron slag and immediately began a search for the ancient iron furnaces in which the slag had been produced. The discovery of my associates and myself of 20 or more ancient smelters during the following 2 years in a very small area of Ohio depended upon a series of such fortuitous incidents. It was, in fact, almost by chance that we uncovered the remains of America's ancient Iron Age civilization. And it was also almost by chance that archaeologists were simultaneously digging up the remains of this prehistoric civilization in Virginia. It's funny because I'm gonna let you know a lot of the eastern woodland Siouan tribes, the eastern Siouan tribes, right? They were coming from Ohio. That's their original location, and they might have brought this advance because they were in Virginia and North Carolina, for many thousands of years, before Europeans arrived. So it could be the same culture. There is a history of a migration connection there of certain peoples from that area to Virginia to the Carolinas. All right. Chance is, of course, the most reliable factor on which to depend for the unfolding of the past. And moreover, it is becoming less and less likely that chance or accident will lead to future discoveries regarding the past. A Smithsonian archaeologist, Dr. Frank H. Roberts, has warned us of the little short of appalling problem. Now he's trying to hijack, facing archaeologists of the future, because many American Aborigines lived along river banks. About 80% of the archaeological remains in the nation will be lost forever, as rivers are dammed and reservoirs are filled. All right, so that's him trying to gatekeep. He's like, don't even bother. 80% of it is lost. Don't even look. It's close to the river. It's probably lost. Like that's his. That's just him saying that. Archaeologist Roberts was speaking from experience, for he had just completed work on a project with other archaeologists to salvage prehistoric relics on land soon to be flooded by a new dam. Oh, that's how they're being destroyed. Not by the rivers, but by their new dams, right? That are flooding these ancient American indigenous sites, cities, towns, and all this other stuff, right? Or even these so-called black towns from colonial eras. On Bugs Island near the Virginia North Carolina border, the government was then building a large dam for flood control and hydroelectric power. Yeah, I know the false narrative. In cooperation with other archaeologists, Roberts had unearthed in the area iron slag, iron nails, and iron fragments, relics of a prehistoric ironworking people, which would have been lost when the area was inundated several years later. That would have nobody would have known. They covered this whole area with water, guys, so you wouldn't keep finding evidence. You see what I'm saying? Oh no, don't worry, they didn't make iron over there. Yeah, you hit it all. You lied to us about it. You know, they don't want you to think, oh, because if we produce iron, then what else can we produce? You know, like, oh wait, so we're making swords, we're having battles. Oh yeah. Oh, what else can we build? Oh, you mean just like the Romans, or just like the ancient Hindu, or just like the ancient Egyptians? Again, like I always say, guys, if it talks like a duck, walks like a duck, it must be a duck, right? This is the true old world. A few miles from the future Bugs Island Dam, an amateur archaeologist was almost simultaneously picking up iron slag and fragments of iron on his estate in nearby land. The archaeologist was James V. Howie, a famous small arms expert who was spending much of his retirement time prospecting for ancient Folsom points and Indian relics. One day while he was searching for relics, a neighbor's bull broke through a fence and wandered onto his land. That sounds dangerous. After chasing the bull back to the neighbor's pasture, he sat down on a large rock, exhausted, prodding the earth at his feet with his archaeologist's pick. As he sat there, he unearthed a large lump of cinder just below the surface. From then on, he continued to uncover cinder as he dug for relics. Noticing that there was an abundance of bog ore all around, he decided that the cinder was slag, refuse of Indian campfires that had burned so long that they had baked the iron out of the bog ore. During the following months, Howie uncovered iron relics in association with ancient stone tools, spearheads, and arrowheads on 6 different sites on the north side of the Staunton River near Clarksville, Virginia. Archaeologists at the Smithsonian classified the stone spearheads as pre-columbian. Howie decided, therefore, that the iron must be of meteoric origin, and not, as he had thought, bog ore baked by Indian campfires. Howie's land was virgin soil. Examining official records, he found that no iron had been smelted on his property since 1782, when a previous owner had received the estate as a government grant. As a what? As a government grant, they took your land. And as stated above, the Smithsonian had declared that the stone spearheads were pre Columbian. Putting all these facts together, Howie came to the conclusion that the iron objects, and an old bronze vase found embedded in a slag had to be of prehistoric origin. He therefore decided there could be only one explanation for the presence of the iron and iron objects on his estate and neighboring areas. The iron had been deposited as debris from an exploding comet and had been hammered into shapes by unknown prehistoric people. All right, that's like a big conjecture right there. You know, he's trying to explain why he's finding this here. Nobody's challenged this theory. Can you believe that? Realizing that so called Howie iron sites were faced with obliteration as he saw progress in the building of the Bugs Island Dam, Howie spoke out in distress over the loss of these sites and the most important Folsom sites in the eastern states. All right, what are they doing? They probably did flood them. They flooded these places so you will never find anything anymore. Calling all these ancient sites a physical part of the American heritage that should not be lost to future generations. He sent specimens of his slag and iron discoveries to the Smithsonian Institution for examination. George Ellinger, metallurgist of the National Bureau of Standards, was asked by Smithsonian officers to examine the specimens, and in March 1949, Dr. Ellinger invited me to join him at the Smithsonian to assist in the examination. Among the Howie specimens there, we found fabricated items, including carburized dyes that appeared to be ancient. To me, the slag in the collection was of special interest. Magnetic test and color comparison of this Virginia slag with the Ohio slag showed that they were similar, but that the Ohio slag seemed to contain more iron. So I went to Virginia, feeling certain that I would find there, on the Howie estate and also on other Howie sites, relics of an ancient iron working civilization. At the Howie home were hundreds of iron artifacts, which Howie called cometary iron, easily identified. Among the items were many Viking type tools, spikes and rivets, scribbers for marking wood, caulking tools used in building Viking ships, chisels and axes, bow spikes and bow rivets. All right, so people get mad 'cause I say just because they're calling all this Viking doesn't necessarily mean it's Viking, so-called Viking. What does Viking mean? Who's the Danes? What's the origin of the Danes and the Norse people? What's their origin? Either way, you're saying American people couldn't have created this and brought this knowledge over to Greenland, over to Northern Europe. You may be seen in reverse. That's the hijack. The chisels and axles were formed by welding together thin sheets of iron by cladding. The rivets were duplicates of rivets found in a Viking ship, the Osberg, which was discovered in 1903 under a mound on the shores of Oslofjord, Norway. All right, they can find Viking ships, guys. Listen to this. I'm gonna just something for you to think about. They can find Viking ships, but they can't find one slave ship. It has been believed that the ship had been buried under the mound 1100 years ago. An iron boat, rivet, which was dug up on a Howie site at the junction of the Dan and Staunton rivers, is a duplicate of the rivets used in Viking ships. All right, so it looks just like them, so doesn't mean they are. You might be seen in reverse. Also unearthed on the Virginia sites were several round nails like those of the Vikings had so painstakingly made. These nails are very important, for they are uniquely different from nails made by modern iron workers. Scattered over the Howie sites were pieces of slag that indicated there was a primitive smelter nearby. Using the slag as a guide, I located an ancient hearth pit of the Celtic type under a pile of slag on Oak Hill, a low eminence overlooking the five iron sites in the valley below. This furnace is an oval pit, 7 feet long and 5 feet wide. It was originally enclosed by a stone wall that has been torn down for the stones used for grave markers in a nearby cemetery. Figure 3.3 shows similar Celtic type furnaces found in Sweden and Virginia, just like the ones in Sweden. All right, ancients. Going back up real quick, and some of the artifacts, iron artifacts they're finding. Says 3.1 iron relics from the Howie collection. At the top is a sickle handle like those used in Northern Europe in ancient times. The second object is a nail die, such as an ancient iron workers used to produce nails from hard pit iron. The third item is a scriber used to mark boards for sawing, and the items at the bottom is a caulking tool, similar to those used by the ancient Norse. All right, they're finding this where Virginia, ancient America. The press related the story of the findings of this furnace accurately as follows. He, Mallory, asked to go immediately to the site of the discovery of one of Howie's relics. He, Howie, Will Huntley, and one of Huntley's sharecroppers named Johnny Hester went into the woods. At the site, Captain Mallory studied the area. Dig here, he directed Hester. After digging a bit, Hester was told to move to another spot. Captain Mallory then explained what he was looking for. If my beliefs are true, he said, we are going to find a fire pit which has been used to melt down ore. Mallory described the shape of the oven and how it would be built. He said that he thought that they would find nails that resembled colonial nails and that if they did, they were close to a great discovery. Hester kept digging. Soon he hit the furnace that Mallory had described, and there were the nails, along with other bits of metal and a great amount of slag. I had felt certain that we would find the ancient nails because the Howie collection of artifacts I had seen several dies of the Viking type for making nails. Nails formed by hand in such dies have off-centered heads. These nails had off-center heads. Colonial nails, on the other hand, were machine cut and machine heated or headed, sorry, and so the heads were all concentric with the shaft. The difference between ancient iron and modern iron shows up in the respective nails. Ancient iron was too soft to make nails that could be driven into wood without special treatment. To harden them, the ancient iron worker baked the soft iron sheets from which they were to be cut, or the nails themselves, at a high heat in a charcoal fire for days. During the baking, the outer shell of the iron was carburized or turned into steel by carbon absorbed from the charcoal. To confirm my identification of the ancient nails, I took some of them to Jamestown, Virginia, for comparison with colonial nails found in the abandoned settlement there. In contrast to the round ancient nails, the hundreds of colonial nails dug up in the excavations at the Jamestown settlement are all rectangular, and their heads are concentric with the shafts, right? So, see what they're saying, guys? This is ancient. This ain't colonial stuff. And of course, they're trying to make it into a Viking thing, Celtic thing. But again, America's a true old world. It's all conjecture. Sketches of Celtic type furnaces in Sweden and Virginia. The sketch at top shows a cross section at the base of a Celtic type furnace found in Uswaga Parish, Västergötland, Sweden. All right. And then right here it says slag bottom of Celtic type furnace on Oak Hill, Virginia. What they're finding. For metallurgical comparison of the ancient and the modern nails, the National Park Service loaned iron nails from Jamestown to Battelle Memorial Institute and to Dr. Ellinger of the National Bureau of Standards. Battelle metallurgists reported that the hardening process used in the ancient nails was not used in the iron nails or other iron tools from Jamestown that they had tested. After we found inside the furnace fragments of slag, like the slag found by Howie on the sides in the valley below, Howie abandoned his theory that the iron was of cometary or meteoric origin. Miner- Mineralogists of the National Museum later proved that the Virginia iron was neither cometary nor meteoric. The ground on the Virginia sites was quite thoroughly impregnated with slag during the operation of the very old Celtic furnaces. All of the iron and iron tools found there were covered with a thick coating of slag. As soon as we removed the slag for laboratory examination, the iron began to disintegrate, rusting very rapidly. Evidently, only furnace slag and a few slag protected tools have survived through the centuries. Those tools from which the protective coating of slag was removed in the process of production apparently did not survive for long. The iron and the iron tools unearthed by Howie were found in close association with ancient stone tools, arrowheads, and spearheads of all of the sites of discovery, on all of the sites. In the same way, similar iron and stone artifacts that I had found on the beaches of Newfoundland in 1946 were lying together. It is a generally accepted rule that all artifacts found such close association are the product of a single civilization. If this is a sound rule, the Iron Age on this continent apparently began at a time when Folsom's points were still being used. All right, you guys hear that? It is, of course, possible that the Folsom points found in association with the iron were copied from earlier models by arrow makers of more recent times. Archaeologists believe that the Folsom people lived in America 10 or 15,000 years ago. All right, again, these tags, just like Clovis, Folsom, these are all tags, such to hijack. And again, as he says, they believe, archaeologists believe, they don't know, they believe. So they could have been longer than that, and they don't even know their real names. They don't want us to know their real names, who these people, what these people call themselves. They base this theory on the discovery of fossil points embedded in the bones of animals, some assumed to have become extinct about that long ago. Assumed. They didn't. They didn't. That's a big one right there. Both the fossil type points and the samples of the iron and slag from the Howie sites have been accepted as authentic by the Smithsonian Institution, where they were left for storage. It is not possible to determine the age of the iron sites in Virginia by their height above sea level. For the land, there is practically stationary. By contrast, the land in Newfoundland is rising at the rate of about 4 feet per 100 years. By measuring the height of the raised beaches in Newfoundland, I was able to determine the approximate age of the site and to show that the settlements there were contemporaneous with the historic Scandinavian settlements in Greenland and Ireland. In the summer of 1950, R.W. Breckenridge, a professor of metallurgy at Iowa State College in Ames, visited the Virginia iron sites uncovered by Howie. In a letter, Dr. Breckenridge says, I examined specimens from that region. I found no meteoric iron. I did find old style wrought iron and what would be classed at present as dirty steel, containing slag inclusions, iron oxide, and steels of varying carbon contents, all in the same piece. We found furnace slag under the roots of an oak tree estimated to be 3 or more years old, or 300, right, years old. We found no furnaces, but we did find what appeared to have been a bowl-shaped pit with a little burnt clay at the bottom. The ground in many scattered areas contained at the shallow depths irregular masses of iron, not gray cast iron, and many nails and partially formed tools. Howie excavated in all 16 sites within 60 miles of his estate in Mecklenburg County, Virginia. He found more than 400 pounds of iron, all right, in Virginia. Ancient 400 pounds of iron. Much of it worked for industrial use. The iron remains a mystery that baffles professional archaeologists. It's a mystery or my story. Mystery, my story. Unfortunately, as Howie feared, the sites of discovery for the most part have been lost in the floodwaters of the Bugs Island Dam. They flooded the area, guys, so you can't even go dig more. They wanted to hide the whole area. It's under the floodwaters now. Although there are in this collection of old Virginia iron, Viking type round boat rivets, caulking tools, scribers, and cladded chisels, the most solid evidence of pre-Columbian iron industry near Clarksville is in the thousands of pieces of iron slag, many of them in undisturbed hard pan. This slag is a type found only around the ancient furnaces, such as those in Scandinavia, Germany, Belgium, and Greenland, guys, all right? I mean, is it clear to you now? It's only found in these ancient places in Europe. Same type of slag, iron slag, all right? Virginia and Ohio. And that's the end of chapter 3, guys. Again, this was the book, The Rediscovery of Lost America, the story of the pre-Columbian Iron Age in America. And we read the first 3 chapters. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I think this is a big one right here. So, just remember anytime anybody says, well, you guys didn't have iron. No, 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 no. Hold up. Hold up. What you know about Spruce Hill? What's on the Bugs Island Dam, huh? What's under there then, huh? What's all those furnaces in Ohio with all this iron being found, huh? All right, so dodge the hijack. Again, this is the true old world. We've had probably a lot of, resets, cataclysms, and things like that will help kind of, you know, do a couple reads and people rewrite things, so, but the geology, the archaeology, a lot of times never, it doesn't lie. Like when you finding this stuff, it don't lie. The science don't lie a lot of the times, land of milk and honey indeed. You know, shout out to a wise, wise brother, right? Shout out to a wise brother. Hold up, guys. Let me tell you what he told me. You know, you got to think logically sometimes, and you know, sometimes we don't really think logically. How can they tell us there's no iron here? You know, so I'm telling Warshid Red Lion, you know, Warshid Red Lion, hey, you know, they're saying we didn't have iron here. Can you believe that? And he's like, what you mean? Are you saying we don't got rocks? And I just started cracking up. Like you know, like that's true. That's just the most logical thing. You know, what do you mean? We got rocks. What do you mean we don't have iron here? And as you guys saw in the beginning, you know, even if it was by mistake, I mean, the indigenous people would have saw the iron, even if it was by mistake, and eventually, you know, like reproduce it, you know, reproduce it. Let's see. But I hope you guys enjoyed the reading. All right, we're gonna go out talk about Rob. Shout out to Rob for the beat. Once again, Rob and Dre beats with bite. All right, that's what we're gonna leave off with today. Let me just get that ready. And again, I hope you guys enjoyed the reading. We might read a little bit more from this book. It starts going into the whole Celtic and Viking travels, and we got so many books that talk about that. And I already got future videos planned on all the real research, not just one book, but you know everything everybody's saying. And but we're gonna get to one book before that, and we're gonna talk about Greater Ireland, the Greater Ireland. Yes, where was Greater Ireland? That was here in ancient America. Much love and respect. Pura vida, mi gente. Wow.
Robin Dre, bye.
Yo, Robin Dre, pull up.
Robin Dre, bye.